This video is meant to be a complete tutorial of the basics of LucidChart so that you can watch the video, you can get up and running using LucidChart right away. If you want to learn the more advanced features of LucidChart, for example, how to use layers, you should be able to watch one of my other tutorials to learn those more advanced features. Let's assume that you've signed up for LucidChart and you want to jump in and make a chart or diagram of some kind. Here I am in my account. I can just click Create in the upper left corner. I can create a folder. You can see I've got a few folders set up and a lot of different documents on my screen. But I can click New Folder if I want to, or I can just go into New Document. Now, depending on the type of account that you registered for, you may see different categories and templates that you'll have access to. If you signed up for a professional account, if you signed up for an education account, if you just have the free demonstration account, you'll see different categories listed here on the right side of the screen, and like I said, you'll see different templates. If you're part of a LucidChart team, you'll also see some team templates that you can access. Now you can browse through these different categories and templates on your own to see the ones that are most useful for you, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a network specialist or an engineer or whatever. But just as an example, let's say I want to do a network diagram. I can just click on that and it brings up some standard generic network diagrams that I could access, and I could just modify them and use them myself. Here's a server rack diagram that I could use and modify. But I just want to show you the blank network diagram. So I'll click that, it opens up, and it takes me to the LucidChart interface. The first thing I need to do is name my chart, click OK, and I'm ready to go. Notice in the upper left corner of the screen it says Basic Network Diagram. That's the name of my chart. I can change it at any time by clicking and renaming it. Underneath that I have what's called the menu bar. You can see across the top here. And similar to Google Docs, LucidChart will save your documents almost immediately upon any change that you make. As you can see here, it says all changes saved. This is a pretty standard menu bar at the top of the screen. You should know though that this symbol here, the Lucid symbol, will, if you click it, it will take you back to your documents. Notice that the menu bar does have some useful things on it. It has basically a list here of some of the keyboard shortcuts. If you choose a menu, notice that it tells you what the keyboard shortcuts are. That's pretty standard, but I would encourage you to look through those and make a note of what those keyboard shortcuts are. There's also some downloading options so that when you're done with your LucidChart diagram, you'll be able to download it in different ways. This arrange menu is pretty useful. It helps you to arrange your objects in a line or vertically, horizontally. You can align them, distribute them certain distance apart from each other, and then also the ability to group and ungroup symbols and shapes. Those are some of the key parts of the menu bar at the top of the screen. Let's jump in and look at what you can add to your document here. There are 4 standard shapes or items that you can add to any LucidChart. Notice that there's text. You can just click and drag to add basically a text box, an invisible box with text inside it that you can then double click on to select and to type over. You can also add text inside a box that's visible. There are also notes that you can add to the screen. These could be notes for the viewer, it could be notes for people that you're collaborating with. And then there's also hotspots. These are hotspots that can be interacted with by the person viewing your chart. They can click on this and have different things happen. Notice that I can click here to choose an action for what happens when the user clicks on the hotspot. There's several here that deal with layers, and I'll have another tutorial about layers that you can watch. You could also link to a different page. Notice that I'm on New Page. I could rename that something else if I want to, or I could add a second page here in the upper right by clicking New Page. So I could make this hotspot a clickable button that would take the viewer to another page. I could link to an external website, or I could link to an email. So those are some of the exciting things that you can do with hotspots. I really like those. You've also got some basic flowchart shapes that you can bring in. Some of these are just shapes with text inside them, nothing super special, but very useful. And then others have a little bit more built into them. For example, this off-page link is automatically set up basically as a hotspot. I guess more like a link, not a full hotspot, but it's set up and ready to go. You just drag it onto the screen and then choose what kind of a link it should be. So play around with those to see all the different flowchart options that you have. There's also some containers that I got and some shapes, and I can just click and drag to drop those shapes onto my chart. Now these next sections of what they call the toolbox, all of this here at the left is called the toolbox. The next part of the toolbox is unique basically to this kind of chart that I chose to create. Remember, I chose to set up a network diagram chart. Because of that, it gave me the Cisco basic symbols that I can click and drag and use in my chart. But if I had chosen, let's say, a Venn diagram chart or some other kind of maybe educational chart, I would have gotten different symbols instead of these Cisco basic symbols. There's also Cisco Extended and a few different other libraries that I can pull from and use. Notice that in addition to that, in my toolbox, I also have a section called User Images. These are images that I have used in past diagrams and charts that I've made. And so LucidChart remembers those and says, okay, you may need those again. And so these are my user images. Underneath that, we have team images. I'm part of a team that uses LucidChart, and I can access their images and pull their images in and use them in my charts as well. Now this is wonderful, but with so many images and charts and diagrams and symbols and shapes, it's going to be hard for me to find that perfect one that I need in each circumstance. Fortunately, they've got this really handy Google search tool here in the upper left corner. And if I type in, let's say I need an image of a switch, I can just type in switch, hit enter, and it brings up LucidChart icons that are switches. It goes to the icon finder and gives me more switches. And then it also searches Google for images just from Google that I can click and drag and pull those in. Without even leaving LucidChart, without opening a tab and going to Google, I can pull in pictures from Google. What a handy, great option this is to have this search here. Now, what if you don't want to get Google images? You want to stick just to the LucidChart images and icons. That's okay. Notice here on the right, you can click on this drop-down arrow and you can deselect Google Images and stick just to the icon finder and LucidChart library. I think this toolbox here at the left is just one of the best things about LucidChart. It brings all these different images, symbols, icons right to your fingertips. Now, let's say, for example, that you know that LucidChart has some icons and images and shapes that you want to use, but you're not seeing them here. The reason you're not seeing them is probably because of the type of diagram you chose to make. In my case, a network diagram. So it gave me certain libraries and it hid other libraries from me. Here in the lower left corner, notice there's a button that says More Shapes. If I click that, it lets me turn on and off different libraries. And you can see that there are just tons and tons of different libraries that I can access. Let's look specifically in the networking area. Because I chose to make a network diagram, it gave me Cisco network icons and some tech clip art, but why didn't it give me these others? Maybe I don't need them, maybe I do. But let's say I do need them. I can just click to turn them on, click Save, and now in my toolbox, notice that I have a lot more to work with. If that gets too overwhelming, you can just go down to More Shapes and you can turn those off again. So this toolbox here at the left is very useful to me. Next, let's look at the right-hand side of the screen to what they call the dock. The dock has some of the most useful options and tools in LucidChart, all there handy in one place. Some of these you can make them happen in other parts of the interface. You could go here at the top and use the menu bar or right click in some cases to get some of this done, but it's nice to have it all here, the most important things in the upper right corner. And most of these deal with content that's on the screen. Let's look at the first tool on the dock. It's the zooming tool, or they call it the navigator tool. I can click on navigator and notice that my LucidChart has grown a little bit here. I've got it spread out vertically. I can click and drag to change what part of my LucidChart is being focused on the screen. Okay, so if you lose track of your diagram a little bit, or your chart, you can use this tool, the navigator, to focus in on what you need to work on right now. You can also zoom in using it. So I could zoom in just on this one section here of my chart, or I can zoom back out and get the whole thing. So the navigator helps you to view and see what you want to view and see in your diagram or chart. Next up, we have graphic tools. I'm going to click on graphic. I'm going to select my graphic, and notice as soon as you select your graphic, it gives you some options, selection options. For example, with my cloud here, I can change the line around it. There's different options I have for lines, including the thickness of the lines, the style, the color, and also the fill color. And you can see that there's other options as well that you can adjust. There's some theme options, and I'll talk more about themes a little bit later, and there's some color scheme options. So those are some of the graphic options that you have here on the dock. Next we have metrics. If I click metrics, whatever I have selected or whatever I select, it gives me the position and size of it and also the orientation. And I can very easily be super precise with the position and size of my shapes. So for example, with this cloud, sure, I could click and drag in the corner to resize it to the size that I want, and I could hold shift if I want to make sure that it stays proportional. Those are good options. But what if I can't eyeball this? What if it needs to be exactly 500 pixels wide and 300 pixels tall? So I can just select that and type it in, hit enter, and notice that it makes it exactly that size. That's very important for a lot of professionals who are using LucidChart. Same with position. I can type in the exact X and Y coordinates, hit enter, and it puts it in exactly the right spot. Orientation is just what you would expect. You can twist the shape, angle it, and just like with what I showed earlier with the size of the document where you can get the corner, there's also a tool here on the shape itself that you can use to straighten it out or tilt it, or you can just type in the angle here in the metrics tool. Next up we have text. This is just what you would expect. If you have text selected, you can change the indentation for the text, the spacing. Notice as I change the indentation, it's affecting my text. You can force the text to be all caps or lowercase. So those are some pretty good text options. To be honest, I don't use those very much. Next up is page settings. When you click on page settings, this is an easy way for you to change the page layout. And like I said before, a lot of these options you could change up here at the top of the screen using the menu bar, but I like having them here in the dock. I can change the page size. There's even a custom setting. I can change it from portrait to landscape. I can change the margins on the page so that there's more or less margins. And page settings, I can change the snap to grid. Now you'll notice that there's an auto paginate feature. If you turn that on, what happens is as you run out of space, let's say I need more space here at the right, I move the word document, and notice what happens. It auto-paginated. It created another page and it actually stretched out the current page that I was on, is what it really did. Now if you don't have that selected, there's another way that you can make the page wider or taller. And what that is look for, just outside the borders of the page, look for this symbol here. You can just click and drag to stretch out the page. You'll probably see it better here in the upper right. I can stretch out the page to make it wider or taller by using those arrows. So those are the page settings. The next button here on the dock is pretty useful. It's the Master Pages button. If I click that, it lets me create a master page. Rather than do that this time though, I'm just going to go up to the top, and I want to point out that you can click Page, Convert to Master. What would this do? Basically, let's pretend like this diagram that I've been working on is so perfect, is so wonderful and applicable that I want to reuse it over and over. What I could do is just click Convert to Master. This is now a master page, and I could rename it if I want to, but it still identifies it as a master. So now let's say this is perfect and done. To create another page based on this master, all I have to do is click the Master Pages button and click Add New. Now notice at the top of the screen, my master has scooted over a little bit and I have a new page that's identical to the master, but it's not a master itself. So this one is not a master, it's just a copy of the master, and now I can add content to it, and it doesn't change the master, it just adds what else I need to add to it. Now notice that the things that are on the master are locked. I can't really move these items unless I go back to the master itself and move them in the master. Now watch, when I go back to my copy of the master, it has moved on that document as well. So this could be very useful if you have one diagram that is applicable to lots of different settings, lots of different rooms, lots of different lessons, all depending on what the purpose of your diagram is. Let's look now at history. The next button on the dock is the History button. When you click on it, it brings up a list of changes and who made the changes. Now for me, if I'm the only one using this document, this is not very useful, it's not very important. But if I'm collaborating on this document with colleagues, this is going to be very important to know who made which changes. Next up we have the Layers button, and this one is a little more complicated, and so I want to save this for another video, but it's definitely worth looking into and learning about. The final button on the dock is a tutorials button, and this is really great. If you get stuck, watch some of these video tutorials. Notice that they assume that I've learned how to make a shape and draw a line and things like that. But if you're struggling with those things, you can click. It gives you some instructions, and you can watch a video if you want to learn more about it. So that's the dock in a nutshell. It's one of the most powerful parts of LucidChart. Next, we need to learn about the properties bar, which is up here toward the top of the screen. And this is a pretty important bar. First, I'm going to drag a couple of different shapes on the screen. And I want to show you that I can add a line between different shapes just by clicking on the shape that I want the line to come from. But you have to be careful. Notice that if you have this symbol of the 4 arrows coming out from your mouse pointer, that's not going to work. In order to draw a line, you need to have your mouse pointer in the shape of a plus sign. And then you can click and drag to draw a line, and you can have it, go just about anywhere. The lines do react and kind of move around and jump to different spots, but you have a lot of control over which way they go. Now, the reason I needed to show you how to add that line is because this properties bar at the top of the screen here deals quite a bit with arrows in a lot of cases. In fact, let me draw a couple more arrows. So let's take a look now at this properties bar and what it does. The first thing, at the far left, there's a button. It's the Change Theme button. If you click on it, you can put your mouse over these different themes. Now you'll notice that these are color and font themes and choices that you can select between, and I like some of these more than others. But the other thing I want you to notice is how it affects the lines in your diagram. Notice that the lines, some of these are more rigid, some are more flowing. It changes the way that your lines appear on the screen. I'm going to choose this theme. So I click and it takes place. Next up, notice that we have some typical font options. If I select a text box or any text at all on the screen, I can go through and choose a font type. I can bold, like I said before, these are typical font options that you have, even alignment and that kind of thing. And then I'll just click off the text for a minute, and I want you to notice that there are other options here in the properties bar that fade and come back as needed, depending on what you have selected. For example, if you have a shape selected, you'll have fill options for your shape, for the fill color, for the line color here. You'll also have the option to lock or unlock your shape. And it's just what you would expect. With the shape locked, I can't move it. The text inside the shape is locked as well. This is pretty much set in stone, and so if I need to move the arrows around or move the other shapes, it's not going to affect the shape that's locked. I'm going to unlock it. So you can see the options you have on the property bar when you have a shape selected. As soon as I click on an arrow, notice that it changes. There are some line styles to choose from. I can change the thickness of the line, the color of the line, the type of line it is, and I can even change the shapes of the lines. So remember, when I changed the theme, it affected the style of the line. You can also do that manually here with these different options. Now it may happen that the perfect option for the line that you want isn't available. If that's the case, you can click this button here, the Edit Line Shape button, and look what it does. It gives you the opportunity of clicking to add little points of change to the line, and then you can click and drag those points to make a very stylized personal line that you might want to have in your diagram or chart. Notice when you're done, hit Enter to save or Escape to cancel. Next up, we have some tools that are a little bit confusing. Notice it says None. It looks like a redo or undo button, and then we have an arrow. So let me explain what those are. In the center, we have a Switch Line Ending button. That's what that is. It's not undo, redo. To the left of that, we have the option for the left side of the arrow. Do we want it to have an arrowhead? And what kind of arrowhead do we want it to have? So notice as I change through those, here at the left, the arrowhead is changing to match it. I want it to be this white arrowhead, so I select it. Now on the right side of the Switch Line Ending button, I can change what the right side of my arrow is like. You can see that. Now you may not want an arrowhead at all. In that case, you can just click on the line, switch to none. You can also lock and unlock lines or arrows. Now, one thing about both shapes and lines is that you can double click on them to add text. So for example, with this line, I'll double click on it. Now I can type in text, hit enter, and the text labels that line. Now in this case, this is a square with text already set up inside it, but let's say if I drag on one of these network shapes, if I double click on it, it gives me the ability to type a label underneath it. Some of the shapes don't necessarily do that, but that's an option that you have to try double clicking and seeing if it'll let you type underneath the shape or icon that you put in. Let's say that I'm ready now to save this diagram and maybe work on it more a little bit later, but maybe I want some help from a colleague or a coworker. All I have to do is share this document with them. So next up, let's look at the sharing options and collaboration options in LucidChart. To share with someone else, all I have to do is go to the upper right corner and click on the Share button. Now, if you've used Google Docs at all, this will seem pretty familiar. Google Drive, Google Docs, this should seem fairly familiar to you if you've used those programs. After clicking Share, it gives me some sharing options, some publish options, and some embed options. Let's look at sharing, and then I can either email users or groups, or I can generate a link, and anyone that has that link could, in this case, edit the document. I just want to email someone and invite her to work on this document with me. I type in her address, click send invitation, and she will be able to edit this document along with me. Now notice there are options. If you don't want the person to be able to edit your document, you can just tell them to be able to view it or to comment on it, but not change it. You could also add them as a full owner. So that is how you add other editors to help you work on a document in LucidChart. Now let's look at publishing options. If I'm completely done, I can click on Publish, and I can save this as a web page. Notice it gives me a little chain link symbol, and I can click on it to get a link to a web page for this diagram that I've made. Another option is to save this or publish it as a PDF. And again, it gives me a link to the PDF that's a published public document. There's some other options for PDFs and images down here if you want to look at those. This third button is for embedding. This gives me an embed code that I could copy and paste into an HTML editor on a website builder, for example, Weebly. You could try it on Tumblr. There's lots of other websites out there that allow you to embed objects from other sites onto your own web page, and this is how you could do that. Just copy and paste this into the HTML editor on those website builders. A couple other quick things I want to point out. Notice that there is a chat option where I can click on it and I can type in a chat. Let's say I'm collaborating real time with other people on this document, which LucidChart can handle very well. I could chat with them by typing in messages and they could chat back. So if we're working across country or across the world, or just down the hall even in the same building, it's a great way to communicate with the person that's helping you build your chart. You can also put in comments. Notice here in the lower right corner it says comments. I can click and I can add a comment that's a little bit more permanent. It's added to my document in a little more permanent way than this chat. The chat is a little bit separated from the actual document. But I want to add a comment. I hit enter and it adds my comment to the shape that I had selected at the time. There's my comment. So my coworkers can look at this, and let's say next week we're able to resolve the problem. We can just go click resolve. So comments are nice. Finally, what if you don't want to add a comment, but you want to add a note? Sometimes we don't want to really comment back and forth or chat back and forth. We just want to annotate and add some notes to our diagrams. To do that, you just right click on a text or a shape or a text box and look for add note. And here I can type quite a bit of text explaining things, and when I'm done, I just click outside it and there's my note. And my collaborators or whomever that has access to this could click on that note to find out more information. So there are a few more things to LucidChart that I would love to show you. Look for my other video, and I may add more in the future. So I hope that that was a good overview of the basics of using LucidChart. After watching this, I hope you'll be able to jump in and make some nice charts and explore and see what you can do.